in Deuteronomy chapter 6. But normally during our Bible class time, what I try to do, we're going through a study in our sermons, I try to open that up for questions or try to cover some of the things from previous weeks that I've heard about. I haven't heard from you over the last couple of weeks. And so any questions so far on the idea of bearing God's name, what that means, or any questions from the previous two sermons, or if you were here for first service, the sermon this morning, any thoughts or questions or ideas or comments on that? I know I did not cover it that thoroughly, I promise you. You had a different question? Okay. Why do you separate the sheep from the goats? They are pastured together at some point, but there's a number of different reasons why you might do that. Shearing. The sheep have a purpose. Goats you more or less eat or milk. Sheep you more or less eat or shear. And so there would be a time where you might separate one out from the other for those purposes. Separate the goats to go milk them, separate the sheep to go shear them. There's a couple of different thoughts on that, but yeah. Goats are pretty stubborn and always know a better way. I have spent a good deal of time around both, goats and sheep. Sheep are a whole lot easier to deal with. You wash them with woolite, by the way. That's not a joke. It's the best way to wash a sheep. Goats, you don't even mess with them. Just they'll eat your car. They'll eat. Not even kidding. I had a goat on our farm growing up that chewed up a metal bumper on a farm truck. Okay, whatever. All right, so we're going to be in Deuteronomy chapter 6, or the end of 5 and the beginning of 6. As we've been, this originally started out as, okay, I'm going to preach about the 10 Commandments. And the more and more I sat with it, the more and more I felt convicted to do something a little bit different. I read a book a couple of years ago. I'm trying to remember what time frame that was when I read that. The book is by Carmen Joy Imes, and it is called Bearing God's Name, and it talks about, there's a subtitle that deals with Sinai. And so some of the ideas, some of the concepts I'm gleaning from this, obviously the name is kind of derived from that book. I would highly recommend that book to anybody that is looking for something beneficial to read, something to kind of get your mind wrapped around what ancient Israel was called to do. Carmen is a amazing Hebrew Bible scholar and wrote her dissertation on this topic. This is the more accessible version of her dissertation in that book. And so it's a really interesting read. It's a very enjoyable read. It's on audiobook. It's on Kindle. It's on paperback. You can get it however you choose to get it. But I would highly recommend that book. But one of the things she keeps drawing us to in that book is in general, for many, many years, Christianity viewed Judaism as a works religion. And a lot of people have, I believe, misunderstood Paul's teachings surrounding the law as, oh, the law was bad and Jesus is good, therefore follow Jesus. By the way, what did Jesus say about the law? The law was good. Yet we're okay to go, oh, the law was bad. No, don't go there. And so in this book, and there's several others I could point you to as well, they start to unpack for us that the reason that the Israelites were so committed to following these guidelines, following these rules, following these expectations, was not to earn their righteousness. It was because God viewed them as worthy of being in covenant. Because we're in covenant with God, because God has already saved us, what comes first, the Exodus or the giving of the law at Sinai? The Exodus comes first, right? God saves them, and then He asks them in Exodus chapter 19, will you be my people? And they say, we will. Then you get the 10 words, the 10 commandments. And at the end of that, the people go, sounds good to us. By the way, the 10 commandments are not laws. We tend to think the law, the 10 commandments. 10 commandments are not laws. Let me give you an example. What is the law in Missouri concerning the speed limit of 55 miles per hour out here? Somebody summarize the law for me. You're not supposed to exceed 55 miles an hour. And what? And what? If you don't, you get a ticket. That's a law. Here's the statute and here's the penalty. Where are the penalties in the 10 Commandments? There are not. You need the rest of Exodus or Leviticus or Numbers or Deuteronomy to give you law. Do this or this will happen. Do this or this will happen. The 10 Commandments or the 10 words, they don't have that. Now, again, we tend to use looser terminology than that. Oh, that's the law. Okay, fine. But they are not individual laws. Thou shalt not murder. Or what? It's not there. There's nothing there to define or what. It's, are you going to be in covenant with God? Yes. Then live like this. This is what it looks like to live in covenant with God. And so the idea of I'm trying to work to achieve my salvation, Israel's already been saved. God has already freed them. Now will you live in covenant with me? It's a little different way of thinking about it. But I want us to look at Deuteronomy chapter 5. And we're going to look at verse 22. This is after the second giving of the 10 Commandments. Again, Exodus 20 is the giving of the commandments directly from God to the people. They hear Him speaking from the mount. And this is the group that just came out of Egypt. In Deuteronomy chapter 5, this is the next generation. Remember, that generation all died in the wilderness. And in Deuteronomy 5, now Moses is giving to these people what was given to the generation before. In other words, you are in covenant too if you choose to be. Continue to walk this way. All right? And so this is what Moses says in Deuteronomy chapter 5 and verse 22. These are the commandments the Lord proclaimed in a loud voice to your whole assembly there on the mountain from out of the fire, the cloud, and the deep darkness. And He added nothing more. Then He wrote them on 2 stone tablets and gave them to me. So who spoke these? God. And He spoke them to who? The whole assembly. They heard the voice of God speak these. That's what's unique about these 10 words. Then let's keep reading. Because Moses gets there. I'll just let him say it. Then He wrote them on 2 stone tablets and gave them to me. When you heard the voice, by the way, notice how Moses keeps talking to the second generation as though they experienced this. That's important. Okay? We are multi-generations removed from the life of Jesus, right? But what He did for them, He did for you. Keep that in mind. Okay? As we get into Matthew's gospel especially, keep that in mind. Matthew does this. There's a literary technique in Matthew we'll get into later, but Matthew is clear to think this way, and we're going to see it. So Moses is talking to the second generation as though they experienced this themselves. Verse 23, when you heard the voice out of the darkness, while the mountain was ablaze with fire, and the leaders of your tribes and your elders came to me. And you said, 'The Lord our God has shown us his glory and his majesty, and we have heard his voice from the fire. Today we have seen that a person can live even if God speaks to them.'" Isn't that interesting that God spoke to Moses from what? The fire, right? In the burning bush. And now God speaks to Israel from the fire on top of the mountain. But watch the next line, okay? Verse 25. "But now, why should we die? This great fire will consume us, and we will die if we hear the voice of the Lord our God any longer." They've realized that you don't die from hearing the voice, but they're afraid of the voice. If we have to listen to it again, we don't think we can take it. "So, for what mortal has ever heard the voice of the living God speaking out of fire as we have and survived?" Well, Moses has done it a couple times now. They've done it. But again, it must be an incredibly draining and frightening and physically taxing experience. And so they have a reaction to that. Verse 27. "Go near and listen to all that the Lord our God says. Then tell us whatever the Lord our God tells you, and we will listen and obey." So Moses, you listen to God, and then you tell us what God said, and then we'll follow it. Verse 28, "The Lord heard you when you spoke to me, and the Lord said to me, 'I've heard what this people has said. Everything they said was good. Oh, that their hearts would be inclined to fear me and keep all my commands always, so that it might go well with them and their children forever. Go tell them to return to their tents, but you stay here with me, and so that I may give you all the commands, decrees, and laws you are to teach them to follow in the land I am going to give them as a possession. So be careful to do what the Lord your God has commanded you. Do not turn aside to the right or to the left. Walk in obedience to the Lord your God. Walk in obedience to all that the Lord your God has commanded you, so that you may live and prosper and prolong your days in the land that you will possess. These are the commands, decrees, and the laws the Lord your God directed me to teach you to observe in the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess, so that you, your children, and their children after them may fear the Lord your God as long as you live by keeping all the decrees and commands that I give you, so that you may enjoy long life. Hear, Israel, and be careful to obey, so that it may go well with you, and that you may increase greatly in a land flowing with milk and honey, just as the Lord, your God, the God of your ancestors, promised you." What do you keep getting re-emphasized here over and over and over again? God blesses them just like he blessed their fathers. Why? He's got a promise to them, and he tells them he will fulfill that promise if you follow the commands, if you live in covenant. Teach your children to do this. Why? So that you get to experience the blessing for generation to generation to generation. The implied opposite of that is what? If you don't live in covenant with God, okay. But you're choosing that. You're choosing to walk away from that blessing. And Moses is going to go even further in Deuteronomy. Again, this is not an exhaustive study on Deuteronomy. But Moses later has the people split into two groups. Do you remember? They go up, he tells them to do this, and then later they do this. They go to two different mountains, and one shouts blessings. If we live by God's covenant, God does this. If we reject God, God does this. Blessings and curses, blessings and curses. Why do we live in covenant? So that we continue to experience the blessings of being in covenant with God. You turn your back on him, that doesn't happen. There are penalties for turning your back on God. Moses continues here. This is how important it is. Verse 4. "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength." You ever heard that before? This is called the Shema. The first word here is the Hebrew word Shema. And this phrase was repeated over and over and over again as a prayer throughout the day by faithful Israelites. It's continued today. There's a great book by Scott McKnight called The Jesus Creed, where Scott takes that same concept and has you repeat not just this part, but the Jesus part, right? That is, love God and love your neighbor. And throughout that book, he talks about the rhythm of that, how it transforms us to go throughout our day. When you wake up, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, your mind, and strength. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. There's no commandment greater than these. When you get to a stop sign, recite it to yourself. When you're washing your hands, recite it to yourself. When you're drinking water, recite it to yourself over and over again. That can transform you into being the people of God. It can remind you constantly of what Jesus' expectation of his people is. Anyway, that's a slight tangent there. Love him with all your strength. Verse 6, these commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your house and on your gates. When the Lord your God brings you into the land that he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give you, a land with large and flourishing cities you did not build, and houses filled with all kinds of good things that you did not provide, wells you did not dig, and vineyards and olive groves that you did not plant, and when you eat and are satisfied, be careful that you do not forget the Lord who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. How many benefits do you get to experience in our world today that you did not build or that you did not make or that you did not plant? Most everything, right? How many meals do you get to eat that you did not cook? Right? We'll just go through the drive-thru and sticker, or one of you does the cooking, one of you does the other, okay? I am doing my best not to eat out as much. There's several reasons behind that, but over the last week or so, I've done some cooking, and I am reminded in our household with all of our little picky appetites that are about this tall or shorter, it's not all that long ago that you would cook all day to eat, right? You get up very early in the morning and you would cook and you would gather and you would grind and you would do all the things so that you could eat breakfast. And guess what? About the time you get done, you got enough energy to go start preparing for the next meal. It's difficult. And here Israel is going to walk into a land and there's already vineyards there. I don't have to fertilize it. I don't have to plant it. Guess what? I just get to go out and grab it. I get to live in a house that I didn't have to build. Anybody ever seen Little House on the Prairie? I love that. I love that series. And I remember in the story, do you remember how when they would move, how much work it was? You're out in the middle of nowhere, and now we need a house. What are you going to do? Start looking for some trees, because you've got to make lumber, right? Imagine a world where that is normal, and you just get to walk in and enjoy the rewards. Folks, we are living in that in a large degree. Don't forget who God is. It's so easy to depend on ourselves, or depend on somebody else, or depend on the pizza delivery guy, and not depend on God. In the wilderness, the people solely had to depend on God. When you walk into blessing, don't forget who is the giver of that blessing. Don't lose that. Don't forget it. Verse 13. Fear the Lord your God. Serve him only and take your oaths in his name. By the way, in our sermon we look at Deuteronomy 10 and verse 20. And verse 20 is almost a repeat of this. Love God, serve him only, and take oaths in his name. That's kind of a unique phrase there. What do you think it means to take oaths in his name? Yeah, if you're going to make a promise and you do it in the name of God, you're reminded to do what you say you will. Why? Has God made oaths? Because God keeps his promises. If I'm imaging God, what should I do? Keep my promises. Do you have a comment? Let your yes be yes and your no be no. This is exactly what that gets to. Because in that teaching, what does Jesus start saying? You're swearing by the gold on the temple. Oh, but that's not, they've got this game where they can make these oaths and it means nothing to them. It's like they're crossing their fingers behind their back and they've missed the principle. What does God say to do? You better do it. Keep your commitments. Yeah, why? Because you're misrepresenting God. You are the people who bear God's name. You are the example of God in the world. And if you take an oath in his name and then you welch on the deal, what are you saying about God? Can I trust God? I guess not. You made a promise in his name and you didn't keep it. Well, let that be a reminder. We need to be careful about making promises. That's back in Genesis, yeah. Yeah. The fire pot where God makes a promise to Abraham. We've talked about that, where the animals get cut in half and they're spread on the side. That my understanding, I have not seen this with my own eyes, my understanding is that in some of those Middle Eastern cultures, that's still a thing today, is that they will butcher an animal, put the halves on either side, the blood runs in the middle, and the joiners of the covenant walk through the blood. And what they're saying is, if I break the covenant, you can do that to me. And if you break the covenant, I'm going to do that to you. And then after that, they have a meal with the animal, and they eat together, and that bonds them together. Again, that's a far cry removed from just getting through the drive-thru and getting on our way and eating while we're driving. Food had a very different meaning in that day and time. And so when that comes to Moses, the promise that God makes to Moses, that God makes to Abraham, we find something interesting. God goes through the blood. Does Abraham ever go through it? No. Two variations of fire go through the blood both times. So who has taken the covenant upon themselves? God. Not on Abraham. So what God is in essence saying is, Abraham, if I break the covenant, I'm going to die. Abraham, if you break the covenant, I'm going to die. Who died on the cross? God kept his word. There's a lot there. It was not based on Abraham's perfection. If it was, Abraham would have died almost instantly. But God did not take that covenant upon him or put it on Abraham. It was on God. Same thing when you get to Exodus, that promise that he made to Abraham. The people didn't do anything to deserve being freed from slavery. They didn't earn it. They didn't deserve it. God rescued them and then said, now do you want to be in covenant with me? And the people said, yes, we do. Then here's the 10 words, the 10 commandments. And the people go, yes, we agree. And 20 seconds later, they're worshiping the golden calf. They're doing all the things. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the legal way of filing something in that economy. Yeah. I'm not going to go there. That's a matter of opinion, and I'm not going to go there. By the way, this is also repeated not just in Deuteronomy chapter 10 and verse 20, but in Joshua. At the end, actually, let's go there real quick. This is Joshua 23. This is after the people get into the land. Sorry, my Bible is falling apart, and I have to hold it kind of odd to keep it from slamming shut here. Yeah. Deuteronomy chapter 20, Joshua chapter 23, and starting in verse 6. Be very strong. Be careful to obey all that is written in the book of the law of Moses without turning aside to the right or to the left. Have we heard that language before? Moses just said that in Deuteronomy 6, right? Don't turn aside to the right or the left. Verse 7, do not associate with these nations that remain among you. Do not invoke the names of their gods or swear by them. Why? They're nothing, right? Who are you in covenant with? Who keeps promises? The God that saved you. You must not serve them. You must not bow down to them. But you are to hold fast to the Lord your God as you have until now. That phrase, hold fast, we're going to see that again. That's in Deuteronomy chapter 10 and verse 20. Yeah, verse 20 as well. Hold fast. And it's the same word that's in Genesis chapter 2 and verse 24. Anybody know off the top of your heads what Genesis 2 verse 24 is? Turn to Genesis 2 verse 24. Genesis 2 and verse 24. That is why a man leaves his father and mother and is held fast or united, or the old word cleave, to leave and to cleave. Cleave to his wife, and they become one. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is, and you be one with God. That's the walk we're supposed to have with God. It's a big deal. Questions, comments over that? Wow. Yeah. It's not something light, is it? It's a big commitment. Sorry, I'm jumping all over the place. I'll blame COVID fog. It is a real thing, man. Verse 14. Deuteronomy 6, sorry. There you go. Why, you can't read my foggy brain? Really? Deuteronomy 6 and verse 14. Do not follow other gods, the gods of the peoples around you. For the Lord your God, who is among you, is a jealous God. And his anger will burn against you, and he will destroy you from the face of the land. Do not put the Lord your God to the test as you did at Massah. All right, that's a good one. Anybody know that reference? The people putting God to the test at Massah. Exodus chapter 17. What happens is the people ask God for water in a way that goes beyond like basic needs kind of things. Okay? Again, the people in the wilderness have to fully rely on God. Now, has he starved them? No. They need food. What does he provide for them? Manna and quail, so much so that they can't eat it all. It comes out their nose. Yeah, it floods them. Don't you hate it when it rains quail? Yeah, floods. Yeah. He provides so much for them that they are overwhelmed by the blessing, okay? And what seems to be going on in Exodus chapter 17, again, this is before they get to Sinai, They've already learned who God is and the blessings that God gives and how God provides for them. And He's been providing for them. And all of a sudden, they forget their past blessings and assume God isn't going to provide for them. Did they see His power in Egypt? Did they see His power as they came out of Egypt? By the way, don't get lost. I'll stay focused. I'll keep going. There's this whole creation thing. Think about Genesis 1 and all the stages of creation. There's 6 days of creation and 1 day of rest, right? 3 and 3, and day 1 pairs with day 4. Have you ever noticed that? The first thing God creates, then He populates it. The second day pairs with day 5. God creates it, He populates it. Day 6. Okay? There is a equally decreation thing going on in the plagues of Egypt. There's a whole pattern to it. How many plagues are there? 10. In the creation, it's 3 and 3 and 1, right? 3 days of creation, 3 days of populating creation, day of rest. In the 10 Commandments, there's 3 plagues, 3 plagues, 3 plagues, big plague. We'll get to that at some point, but I just want to throw that there. What does God do when they cross the Red Sea? What does He do at the beginning? He separates the waters from the waters, and dry ground appears. What does God do again at the Red Sea? He separates the waters from the waters, and dry ground appears. The people go through. What does sin do after that? Egypt's sin running in there, guess what it does? Decreation. That's a whole theme going on. And at this moment, I don't remember how I got there. I'm sorry. Oh, the people are asking for things. So you've got this creation thing happening throughout the wilderness as well. God keeps doing these creation things. He's shown them what He is capable of doing over and over and over again. He's got power over all these different realms, and yet they're in the wilderness, and God has been providing drink for them, and all of a sudden they want a sign from God that they can trust Him. Psalm 106. Flip over to Psalm 106. Psalm 106 is a reflection of this. Let's just read it. Psalm 106. Praise the Lord. Give thanks to the Lord, for He is good. His love endures forever. Who can proclaim the mighty acts of the Lord, or fully declare His praise? Blessed are those who act justly, who always do what is right. Remember me, Lord, when you show favor to your people. Come to my aid when you save them, that I may enjoy the prosperity of your chosen ones, that I may share in the joy of your nation, and join your inheritance in giving praise. By the way, Psalm 106, likely written while in Babylonian captivity. They're experiencing the fallout of their sin. Look at verse 6. We have sinned, even as our ancestors did. We have done wrong and acted wickedly. When our ancestors were in Egypt, they gave no thought to your miracles. Had God done miracles? Yes, He did. The whole fact that Israel exists is because of a miracle done between 2 senior citizens who could not have a child. They gave no thought to your miracles. They did not remember your many kindnesses. And they rebelled by the sea, the Red Sea. Yet He saved them for His name's sake, to make His mighty power known. He rebuked the Red Sea, and it dried up. He led them through the depths as though through the desert. He saved them from the hand of the foe, from the hand of the enemy. He redeemed them. The waters covered their adversaries. Not one of them survived. They all believed His promises and sang His praise. But They soon forgot what he had done and did not wait for his plan to unfold. In the desert, they gave in to their craving. In the wilderness, they put God to the test. So he gave them what they asked for, but sent them a wasting disease among them. In the camp, they grew envious of Moses and Aaron, who was consecrated to the Lord. The earth opened up and swallowed Dathan. It buried the company of Abiram. Fire blazed among their followers. A flame consumed the wicked. At Horeb, by the way, Horeb is another name for Sinai. Scholars debate these things. Probably one name refers to the range and one refers to the mount, right? Mount Antero versus the Rockies, or Pikes Peak versus the Rockies, okay? So it's two names for the same place. At Horeb, they made a calf and worshipped an idol cast from metal. They exchanged their glorious God for an image of a bull which eats grass. They forgot the God who saved them, who had done great things in Egypt, miracles in the land of Ham, and awesome deeds by the Red Sea. So he said he would destroy them. Had not Moses, his chosen one, stood in the breach before them to keep his wrath from destroying them. Do you remember that? Where God said, Moses, step back, I'm going to wipe them out and I'll start over with you. And Moses says, kill me instead. And God said, okay, I won't wipe them out. Moses stood in the breach. By the way, what does Jesus do for us? Verse 24, then they despised the pleasant land. They did not believe the promise. Again, when they're getting ready to go into the promised land, what do? They forget all that God has done for them and they don't trust him to provide for them over there. They grumbled in their tents and they did not obey the Lord. So he swore to them with an uplifted hand that he would make them fall in the wilderness, make their descendants fall among the nations, and scatter them throughout the lands. They yoked themselves to the Baal of Peor. They ate sacrifices offered to lifeless gods. They aroused the Lord's anger by their wicked deeds, and a plague broke out among them. But Phinehas stood up and intervened, and the plague was checked. This was credited to him as righteousness for endless generations to come. That's Hebrew's language. That's a bit of a rabbit trail, but do you remember the men of the camp were basically sleeping with prostitutes of foreign nations in the camp, in the presence of God, and a plague breaks out among the people, and Phinehas grabs a spear and goes and rams it through, pins them to the ground. There's a whole thing there that I'm going to stay focused. This was credited to him as righteousness for endless generations to come. By the waters of Meribah, they angered the Lord, and trouble came to Moses because of them. For they rebelled against the Spirit of God, and rash words came from Moses' lips. They did not destroy the peoples as the Lord had commanded them, but they mingled with the nations and adopted their customs. They worshiped their idols, which became a snare to them. They sacrificed their sons and their daughters to false gods. They shed innocent blood, the blood of their sons and their daughters, whom they sacrificed to idols in Canaan, and the land was desecrated by their blood. They defiled themselves by what they did. By their deeds, they prostituted themselves. Therefore, the Lord was angry with his people and abhorred his inheritance. Who is God's inheritance? Israel. He gave them into the hands of the nations, and their foes ruled over them. Their enemies oppressed them and subjected them to their power. Many times he delivered them, but they were bent on rebellion, and they wasted away in their sin. Yet he took note of their distress when he heard their cry. For their sake he remembered his covenant, and out of his great love he relented. And he caused all who held them captive to show mercy. Save us, Lord our God, and gather us from the nations, that we may give thanks to your holy name and praise and glory in your praise. Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, from everlasting to everlasting. Let all the people say, Amen. Amen. Praise the Lord. And that's the end of book 4 of the Psalter. there's a lot going in there, but the psalmist goes all the way through the history, and what does he keep emphasizing? You forgot. And as Moses is charging the people there, after reminding them of the terms of the covenant, after pleading with them, he reminds them to write these things on your foreheads, bind them on your hands, write them on the doors, talk about them when you wake up, when you walk down the road, when you sleep, when you eat. Why? So that you do not forget. Be honest, how many of us forget? You turn on the television and you forget how God has provided over and over again, and you see doom and gloom. By the way, if you tag me on Facebook, I'm off of Facebook right now. I am avoiding it like the plague because it has been a plague to me for a while. And so text me or call me or email me or something like that because I likely won't see it. Why? Because it makes me forget. I don't want to forget. So, may the Lord bless you and keep you, make His face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May He turn His face toward you and grant you peace so that you do not forget. Also, don't forget that it's a fellowship time and there are tasty snacks, manna from heaven out there on the table, and coffee. And I believe we're going to have a baptism right before first service. So you might make your way, right before second service. We've already done a service today, haven't we? Oh, how easily I forget. Okay. Second service for the first time. There you go.